Fantastic this week to be able to introduce you to Jill Reynolds if you haven't yet met Jill. Jill's been part of our church for a while, but she knows Salford really well and has a heart for Salford, a heart for the church, and a heart for hearing from God. And it would be good just to spend some time exploring with Jill some of those elements. You're not from these parts, Jill. Tell us, how did you come to be in Salford in the very first place?
Goodness, right. So I first came to Salford in 2000. So I've been in Salford 20 years this year. And I first heard of Salford at Soul Survivor when this slightly follically challenged Mank stood up and started talking about a project called the Eden Project. They'd started it in Wythenshawe, or that was where they were going to start first, sort of moving Christian youth workers into the local area to live alongside some of the most needy people in that area. And they were going to do the same thing in Salford. Now, I think when I first signed up for this, I think a lot of people thought that I was crazy because I wasn't a youth worker. I'd never done youth work before in my life. But I just had this sort of real feeling that I needed to be in Salford. Salford was the place that I needed to live. And I couldn't really explain it to anyone. So it's a wonder that they actually accepted me. But as I was moving up here, I just had I felt like God was speaking to me about it. And I felt like he was showing me a sort of a key going into a lock. But whereas mostly the key is already shaped, in this particular sort of image, it was the key is going to be shaped in the unlocking. That as I sort of met the problems I was going to face, I was going to change shape. And have.
Funny, this is a long time. It's clear why you came, but why did you stay?
It's very hard to stop loving a city. Salford is a really amazing place. It changed my perceptions and my viewpoint on so many things. And I never met people who were quite so friendly. I remember being slightly traumatized that I walked into Boots and was just to buy face cream, and someone started a conversation with me who I'd never met before, saying, oh, you don't want to buy that one. That one doesn't work. You want that one over there. And sort of, feeling slightly sort of nonplussed by that. But Salford people are people who are committed, people who are friendly, people who are big-hearted, people who are committed. And I love that.
And people who know their face cream, to be honest. that is well known for that.
That too. Cosmetics advice, they're great.
Cosmetics, there's none like us. I mean, quite a lot of that time as well, you've been a teacher in Salford as well, in the schools in Salford, haven't you?
Yeah. I've been a secondary school teacher since 2008, so 12 years. But again, that was a real sort of step of faith. I'd done a speech therapy degree. I hadn't got my license to practice, but I had got my degree. And I started working in secondary schools as a learning mentor, and it was suggested to me that I should go forward and become a teacher. And that was my idea of just ultimate risk. Because all the teachers I could see around me were just jaded and annoyed and didn't like children at all. And I was worried that I was going to turn into one of them. But I genuinely love my job. I love what I do for a living.
Tell me, over the 2 decades you've been in Salford and perhaps before, what's become more important to you as you lived out this life as a Christian? What have you learned to be more appreciative about?
I think, they talk about sort of ex-smokers sort of being the most passionate advocates of people stopping smoking. the things that you overcome yourself, you become like you want to. These are the things that you want to talk about, and you want people to know. And I think, in my time in Salford, I've been really fortunate in that I've got to know some people who've helped me to understand more of who I am in Christ, who the new person is that that came up out of the water, if you like, sort of when I was baptized, and so that's something that I'm passionate about. And part of that is sort of hearing from God and hearing what God has to say about each one of us. I think we're surrounded by voices that tell us exactly where we fall short and exactly what we're doing wrong. And I think sometimes we confuse that with God's voice. We think that's how God sounds. And I'm passionate about helping people to hear what God is saying, and just sort of letting them see how important that is.
I mean, it's a fundamental tenet of Christianity, really, is that this God who we speak to is a God who communicates. It's throughout the whole of Scripture.
Yeah.
And yet, I think it's one of the difficult things that many Christians would, if they were being honest, they would probably struggle with. It's like, I'm not sure how God speaks to me. How have you been blessed by times when other people have shared what they thought God was saying to you? Have you got any stories that you could share about the blessing it's been to you?
Yeah, I think I'll sort of share some of them.
Yeah, you don't need to.
It's not that common, I'll be honest, for people to come up to me and say, I think God's got a word for me for you. It doesn't happen that often. And I think part of the reason is that people assume that if you're someone who shares words, that you don't need anyone else to tell you, which isn't the case. But I can remember sort of a meeting when I was part of Langworthy Community Church, and we had Mike Pilavachi visiting and a couple of people from his church. And this guy sort of turned around, looked at me and said, I just feel God saying, you're a teacher. Now that doesn't sound sort of particularly profound, but I was training at that point. And it felt very unsafe and very insecure. And it was just a very sort of simple confirmation that just made me think, oh, right, yes, okay. So this is who I am. This isn't just what I'm doing. This is, there's more to it than that.
It's interesting. Sometimes it's when it's not, as you say, it's not the profundity of what's said. It's the moment it's said in.
Yes, absolutely.
It's the fact that someone who didn't know you has come and spoken over you into your life, however you might want to describe that. But it's the moment. It's they didn't know what was going on in your head. Yeah,
exactly.
And I think those become the sort of turning points, don't they?
Yeah.
I remember a time I was done. This is many years ago. It was when I was the full-time pastor of Salford, Elim, the first time around. I'd been invited to work at the college, at the Bible college at the time, and for various reasons, I'd had to turn the job down. And it broke my heart because deep down I knew that that's what I both wanted to do, and I felt it was a good thing to do, but I couldn't because of the requirements they asked of me at the time. And I went to a meeting in King's Church, and Gerald Coates was preaching, and he's a great preacher, and lots of people had gone to the front, and including myself. I kind of, like if I go to a big meeting, I think I'm going to get everything out of this meeting. I'm not going to go. There's no point. So I made my way up the front and blessed somebody from Manchester who just prayed a blessing over me, which was great. It was lovely. But I thought, no, I'm going to get a word off him at the front. So I elbowed my way down to the front and sort of positioned myself in front of Gerald Coates. And he prophesied over me. He said, actually, you've got a ministry that will, it sounds ridiculously precocious even to say it out loud. He said, but you've got a ministry that's more than local, it's going to be national, and you've got to believe that and hold on to it. Now, and then I went, that was it. He moved on to the next person, I left. But it was exactly that thing that you just said. It was like at that moment, he had no idea about all the things that have been going on in my own heart and mind. And within 12 months, that's exactly what happened. And suddenly, you know, my life changed in all sorts of different ways. And it is that sort of sense of a God who speaks into our situation and affirms, reaffirms, validates. So when you have a word like that for either a church or, you know, you often in different ways have spoken what you felt God was saying to us as a church, and we've appreciated that. Or for individuals, how do you know when you've got something to share?
Practice. That's the short answer. The short answer is practice. I think I've had the luxury of training in places where you could make a mistake, where you could try things out, and people just said, you know, we're just having a go. We're just going to see how this goes, and that was really encouraging. That was really good, because I don't like making mistakes. So, you know, sort of having a place where you could do that freely was a real gift. I think the second thing is that I've heard a sort of range of sort of people talking about prophecy, and all of them share this sort of common thread that when you prophesy for someone, you have to sort of connect to what God feels for that person, or a small part of that. So one guy talked about how, you know, all of us are treasure in jars of clay, but what we speak to is what rises up in the person. So if you speak to the treasure rises up, and if you speak to the clay rises up. But what you want is the treasure. So you have to speak to the treasure. You sort of, God shows you what the treasure is in that person. All prophecy is designed to draw someone closer to God and make them more whole and have a deeper understanding of what God feels for them and how God sees them. So God is kinder than me. God always says things that are much more kind than me. Not that I'm standing there sort of, you know, thinking other things, but when I hear God sort of saying things, I think, that's lovely.
How does that happen for you, Jill? Is it a thought that comes to you? Is it, you know, is it a set of words that you have in your mind? Is it an inkling? Is it an intuition? How would you explain? You know, I mean, you know, to be honest, you've spoken things that have been really affirming to me, and you felt that God was saying to me at different times, and that's been really significant. But how did you know? How did it come? Not how did you know, but how did it come?
It doesn't come because I'm looking for it. Generally, I won't have asked a question, you know, sort of what are you saying about the situation, God? It sort of comes effortlessly. You don't have to strain for it. It just comes sort of gently. And I think sometimes it's about learning to listen to those gentle words, those gentle things. For me, it can come things often come as pictures. So they often come as images, but sometimes they come in words. And what I'll often be doing in my head when I get something that I think is significant is saying to God, what do you mean by that? Or, you know, just explain that bit, because that's a bit weird. How am I going to phrase that? What's that about? So you can ask questions. And I think as well, you know how people have in jokes, you know, when they speak to each other and they know the other person so well that there are jokes that they share. God speaks to individuals in the language that individual will understand. So when I was 17, 18 and doing my A-levels and learning French, God gave me the phrase, les inondations religieuses, which means holy floods. It wouldn't mean that to any French person. That's not the way that they translate it. But to me, that's what it translated as, because that was the level of French that I had. God speaks to me through goodness. You know, I'm a literature person, so he speaks to me through symbols. He speaks to me through song lyrics. All sorts of random things. So I think I've told this story before, but walking down Trafford Road, not sure about where my next job was going to be, and just praying and going, oh God, I don't know what to do. I don't know whether to sort of start applying for jobs now or wait and see if something comes up at the place I'm at. I'm just so stressed. I can't bear to be in this situation again. And sort of got to the end of that, and then this song came into my head and I didn't know what it was. So I start sort of humming the melody as I'm walking along. And then I get to the chorus and it's Stevie Wonder, Don't You Worry About a Thing. And I hadn't heard it anywhere. It hadn't come up on a radio station anywhere. It was completely out of the blue, but it was exactly what I needed to hear at that precise moment. And that was because he knows how to speak to us in a way that makes sense to us.
And I get that. I think that's absolutely true. And I think that in a sense, perhaps we're not as attentive to God as we could be. In other words, I think that sometimes God's more sort of like waving windmill arms at us, and we're going, I'm not sure you're speaking to me. And I think God's wanting to sort of say, I am, I'm just in this one. But it does lead to a sort of perhaps a final question, which is, what's that helps you stay on track rather than just getting carried away with your own good ideas?
Rather than just going on with myself.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm trying to be polite, but yeah, essentially.
That's all right. I work in a secondary school where we used to not be like there are times when I know I've heard my own voice in what I'm saying. And I think anyone who sort of stands up and talks and sort of says what they think God is saying quite a lot will tell you that the words that you are most cautious about are the ones that sound like you, that actually reflect your opinions.
Yes, it's always worrying when God agrees with who you also disagree with.
Yeah. Thankfully, it hasn't happened that often. I don't know whether that is a good thing, but God's opinions and mine tend to be slightly different. But I think there are some questions that you can ask. So you can. So the first sort of level of accountability is to yourself. What will happen when I say this? Is it the case that people will focus on God and they'll develop a deeper understanding of who God is and hear his voice? Or is it that people are looking at me and they're hearing what I'm saying? Because that's kind of the temptation sometimes, that you sort of, if you ever become the focus of what's going on, you've lost it. You've lost the power of that moment, the opportunity of that moment where God wants to say something, and you're in the way. The second layer of that is I feel like I've sort of taken the right route at Elim from past lessons. I've deliberately made it so that if I'm going to share something, I run it past someone and ask, is this okay? Is this all right? Because it's important that it fits with the church that you're speaking to, and that it fits with what's going on at that time, that it fits with what, you know, the Spirit seems to be doing at that time. And if you're getting the word, you're not always the person to make that judgment.
And I really appreciate that you have consistently. And I think that what that demonstrates is that as a whole church, what we need are all of the gifts of the Spirit, but none of them will be all in one person. But it's actually the body comes together. And I think that idea of saying, well, actually, you know, in exercising these gifts, we're mutually submissive to one another. And the bigger the concept, the more potentially disruptive, the more we need to be able to hold one another accountable to it and submissive to it. But actually, even in the sort of the more, you know, the less contentious or the less significant, I think the principle is actually we make ourselves accountable to one another and go, would this be helpful? Because I don't have the whole picture. So in the light of what you might know or what we might know together, is this helpful at this time? And I think that, you know, our time is running out really, Jill. And I think there's probably context in which we ought to have these conversations more widely. But I think the principle of the church we are becoming and we want to become is that actually everybody's got gifts that we bring, and together we grow stronger because actually we're willing to offer what God's given to us. And I really do appreciate the fact that you've come in, you've joined our church, you've been part of us, and you've been willing to bless people with that. But not just that, but actually the way as well, I think has been really helpful. Jill, we would want to pray for you in these days as we're recording this in the final week of May, and June begins and schools will ramp up again in different ways. And we want to pray for you in that job that you love so much, and pray that you'd continue to hear from the Lord for us and that you'd continue to be a blessing. Really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you.